Clara Whitfield had worked at the town's train station for nearly a decade. A quiet presence amid the comings and goings of travelers, she knew the schedule by heart, could juggle multiple tasks at once, and offered a kind word to anyone who passed through the small frontier station yet. Despite her competence and gentle demeanor, the townsfolk barely noticed her existence at 38. She had long since been considered past her prime, too old for marriage, too ordinary to be admired, too plain to attract attention beyond her duties every morning. Clara arranged the tickets, polished the counters, and greeted travelers with a polite smile. She knew everyone's faces, remembered their preferences, and always offered a listening ear, yet her own life had none of that attention or care. The young women of the town were admired for their beauty and attended social events with eager suitors. Clara watched from the sidelines, unseen and unremarked upon at gatherings. She was often dismissed as helpful but forgettable, and townsfolk spoke around her in whispers, as if her presence were inconsequential despite the neglect. Clara carried herself with quiet dignity. She refused to indulge in bitterness, believing there was value in kindness itself. Even if it went unrecognized, she kept her heart soft, though over time she had grown accustomed to disappointment. Love had long seemed like a luxury meant for others, the young, the beautiful. The socially admired Clara had accepted that perhaps her life would consist of quiet service and unreciprocated smiles. Her dreams of companionship quietly tucked away. Almost forgotten, her days were simple but structured. She greeted travelers, stamped tickets, assisted with luggage, and kept the station in order. She knew the rhythm of the trains as if they were her own heartbeat, and she took pride in being reliable, in offering a calm and steady presence in a world often rushing by. Yet, even as she performed these small acts of service, she sometimes wondered if anyone ever truly saw her. She longed not just for attention, but for someone to notice her spirit, the courage, humor, and warmth she had cultivated quietly over the years. In the evenings, Clara walked home along the dusty main street, observing couples walking arm in arm or sharing quiet laughter on their porches. She felt a pang of longing, a subtle ache in her chest for something she feared she might never have. Yet she also reminded herself that life could surprise her. Even when she felt overlooked, she continued to greet strangers with smiles and offer assistance without expectation, hoping that perhaps one day someone would see beyond appearances and notice the heart that had always been ready to love. On this particular morning, as she polished the counters and organized the ticket stubs, Clara caught herself daydreaming for the first time in months. Perhaps someone unexpected would arrive at her station and see her worth. Perhaps someone would challenge the town's assumptions, refuse to follow the whispers and judgments, and choose her for who she was, not for what others said she should be. Little did she know, that day, the train whistle would carry more than passengers into her station. It would bring a cowboy whose gaze did not skim over her but settled on her, who did not care about her age, her position, or the town's opinion. This day would mark the beginning of a journey where Clara's quiet dignity, long ignored by all, would finally be seen, valued, and celebrated. For Clara, the stage was set, a small station, a crowd of townsfolk, and a life about to change forever. And although she did not yet know it, the moment she had always waited for was only minutes away. The morning sun gleamed across the dusty tracks, casting long shadows over the small frontier town. As the whistle of the approaching train echoed through the station, Clara Whitfield was arranging tickets behind the counter, humming softly to herself, a sound unnoticed by the few townsfolk who had wandered in to catch the morning departure. She barely glanced at the travelers who came and went, her mind focused on her duties, on the rhythm she had come to know so well. Life moved steadily around her, but Clara often felt as though she existed only on the edges, watching while the world continued without acknowledgement of her presence. Then, the train doors opened, and he stepped onto the platform. Luke Harding, a rugged cowboy with a confident stride and weathered features, walked with purpose, his boots kicking up dust as he scanned the station. He was the kind of man who commanded attention effortlessly, not through arrogance, but through presence, self-assurance, and the subtle ease of someone comfortable in his own skin. Yet what drew his gaze first, and held it longer than expected, was Clara. She did not notice him immediately. Her hands were busy sorting tickets. But something in the way he stopped, tilted his head slightly, and studied her sparked a flutter she had not felt in years. Luke's eyes did not wander like everyone else's. They did not judge her hair, her modest dress, or the lines on her face. Instead, they seemed to see through the exterior and lingered on the woman she was inside, capable, kind, patient, and unappreciated. For the first time in years, Clara felt truly seen. Luke approached the counter with a deliberate ease, tipping his hat politely. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice deep and calm, carrying a subtle warmth that made Clara's pulse quicken. "I need a ticket heading west and perhaps some advice from someone who knows this station better than anyone." Clara blinked, momentarily startled. It was unusual for anyone to approach her with such directness. Most people either ignored her or treated her as a background fixture, yet Luke's manner was different, respectful, unassuming, and yet with an air of confidence that made it clear he expected her input. She quickly gathered herself and smiled. "I can help with that," she replied, her voice steady despite the sudden flutter in her chest. She handed him the ticket schedule, explaining the train times and routes with practiced professionalism. Luke listened attentively, nodding as though her words were the most important in the world. He asked a few questions, not just for information, but to engage her in conversation. Each question was carefully chosen, showing interest in her knowledge and her perspective, rather than treating her as invisible. As their conversation continued, the small crowd of townsfolk began to take notice. Some whispered quietly, curious at this exchange. Others shook their heads, dismissing it as a passing fancy, but Clara hardly noticed them. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of recognition and validation, not from society or gossip, but from a man who had arrived, seemingly out of nowhere, and chosen to acknowledge her. Luke's attention was steady and unshakable. He asked her about the town, about the trains, about her day-to-day life, and listened with genuine curiosity. Clara felt her heart lift. It was as if he had opened a door that had long been closed, revealing a possibility she had barely dared to hope for, that someone could see her, value her, and perhaps even desire her, not in spite of her age or station, but because of who she truly was. By the time the train whistle blew for departure, Clara realized that the presence of this cowboy had already begun to alter her world. Where once she had been ignored, she now felt noticed, significant, and alive in a way that the years of neglect had never allowed. Luke's arrival marked the first spark in what would become a transformative journey, one where she would discover that life could surprise her, that hope could re-emerge, and that love could be found in the most unexpected of arrivals. The days following Luke Harding's arrival at the station felt different to Clara. Whitfield, the once monotonous rhythm of her life, was now punctuated by brief, unexpected encounters that made her pulse quicken and her chest lift with a mixture of curiosity and hope. Luke did not disappear after buying his ticket. Instead, he lingered at the station, offering small gestures that, over time, became significant acts of kindness. At first, it was subtle. He carried a heavy trunk from the train for a weary traveler and, without seeking thanks, glanced toward Clara and smiled, acknowledging her presence in a way no one in town had ever done. She felt an unfamiliar warmth at the recognition. When the station was crowded, he would quietly check if she needed help, offering a steadying hand or simply carrying supplies that were too heavy for her alone. These small moments were not just gestures of courtesy. They were proof that he saw her, respected her, and considered her comfort. Their conversations deepened as well. Luke asked questions that were never superficial. Genuinely interested in Clara's knowledge and opinions, he inquired about train routes, local gossip, and even the history of the town. Often pausing to listen intently to her answers, he never interrupted or dismissed her thoughts. Something Clara had longed for but had rarely experienced, his attention was steady, unwavering, and increasingly personal. With each interaction, Clara felt a bridge forming, one that connected her to someone who valued her mind and spirit as much as her presence. Yet, it was not just the practical gestures that moved her. Luke possessed a quiet humor, a twinkle in his eye, that slowly drew Clara out of the cocoon she had wrapped around herself. He teased gently, laughed sincerely at her wit, and respected her boundaries while challenging her to see herself in a new light in his presence. Clara began to remember a time when she had believed herself worthy of attention and affection. His regard felt like a balm for old wounds. Soothing the lingering ache of years spent unnoticed, the townsfolk began to murmur. Some whispered behind her back, speculating about Luke's motives and dismissing her as unworthy. Yet the whispers did little to shake Clara. She had begun to recognize her own worth in Luke's steady acknowledgement. His kindness and attention were a reminder that she mattered, that she could be admired and valued for her competence, her courage, and her quiet dignity. Through all of this, the bond between Clara and Luke strengthened. Unspoken but undeniable, she found herself anticipating his visits, noticing the warmth of his gaze even before he spoke. Luke, in turn, seemed increasingly protective and attentive, positioning himself as a partner rather than a mere acquaintance. Their interactions were subtle but loaded with significance, the kind of gestures that hinted at something deeper: mutual respect, growing trust, and the beginnings of emotional intimacy. By the end of the week, Clara realized that she no longer existed only as a background figure in the town. Through Luke's small acts of kindness, she felt seen, appreciated, and even cherished. He had begun to break down the walls of invisibility that years of neglect had built around her, showing her that attention, care, and genuine regard were possible even at an age and stage in life where she had long assumed she had been passed over. Small gestures, repeated with consistency and sincerity, had the power to change everything for Clara. Luke's kindness was not just a courtesy, it was a revelation in his eyes. She began to see herself differently, and in turn, she dared to hope that love, even in her overlooked years, could still find Irby. The time the sun set over the tracks that evening, Clara understood that her life, once predictable and ignored, was now unfolding in ways she had never imagined. Her heart quietly opening to a possibility that had seemed impossible, that someone could choose her, notice her, and make her feel alive again. The town had always thrived on gossip. Every conversation seemed to carry an undercurrent of judgment, and nothing went unnoticed or unremarked upon for long. When Luke Harding's visits to the station became regular, and when his attention toward Clara Whitfield became visible, the whispers began almost immediately. Townsfolk leaned against fences, exchanged glances, and murmured as they passed by, incredulous that a cowboy of his stature and reputation could show interest in a woman they had long considered past her prime. Clara felt the change in the air. Immediately, she noticed the subtle shifts in the behavior of those around her. The clerk who usually greeted her with indifference now offered a smirk. The ladies at the market whispered behind their hands, and the young men who once ignored her in passing now cast glances tinged with curiosity or disbelief. At first, she tried to ignore it, telling herself that other people's opinions had no power over her. She had survived years of invisibility. She could survive a few whispers, yet, as the rumors grew, so did her discomfort. She began to notice the weight of their scrutiny, the way eyes lingered longer than necessary, and the faint, critical tones behind seemingly polite greetings. It was as though her entire life's worth was being judged not by her character, her deeds, or her heart, but by the audacity of a cowboy seeing value where the town had long refused to look. Clara felt a wave of conflicting emotions, pride in being noticed, yet fear of the judgment that attention inevitably brought. Luke, ever perceptive, noticed her hesitation. He saw the slight stiffening of her posture, the careful avoidance of lingering gazes, and the subtle retreat behind the station counter one afternoon when the station was crowded. He leaned close enough to speak softly but firmly. "Clara," he said, "don't let their whispers define you. I see who you are. That is all that matters." His words were a comfort, but they did not erase the tension entirely. Clara struggled with the town's unspoken skepticism. She had been invisible for so long that public recognition, even from someone she trusted, felt overwhelming. The idea of being scrutinized, discussed, and perhaps mocked was terrifying. Yet there was also a thrill she could not deny. Luke's attention validated her existence in a way the town never had, and perhaps never would. The moment of decision came sooner than she expected during a busy afternoon at the station. With a crowd of travelers and townsfolk present, Luke acted in a way that no one could ignore without hesitation. He stepped toward Clara, took her hand in his, and announced clearly and loudly that she was his chosen companion. Every whisper, every judgmental glance, every doubt was silenced in an instant. Clara's heart raced. Shock, disbelief, and a swelling joy collided within her in that public declaration. Something profound shifted. The town could no longer dismiss her, and Clara herself could no longer doubt her own worth. Luke had not merely chosen her privately, he had honored her in front of the world. The act was bold, courageous, and transformative. It was a statement that her age, her position, and the long years of being ignored were irrelevant when faced with genuine recognition and love. Clara's fear gave way to exhilaration. She realized that love was not a quiet, private thing to be hidden away. Love could be claimed boldly in public. With courage and conviction, Luke's actions had not only silenced the town's whispers, but also awakened something inside Clara, a renewed confidence in herself, a sense of pride in being seen, and the thrilling awareness that she had been noticed for exactly who she was. By the end of that afternoon, Clara understood that life could indeed change in an instant. Where she had once been invisible, she was now seen. Where she had felt overlooked, she was chosen, and in that recognition, she discovered that the courage of one person could rewrite not only public perception but also the quiet, long-held doubts of her own heart. The station buzzed with activity that afternoon. Travelers coming and going, the rhythmic clatter of wheels along the tracks mingling with distant whistles and shouts. Clara Whitfield moved among the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years managing the ebb and flow of a busy frontier station. Yet, beneath her calm exterior, her heart beat faster than it had in years. She felt a strange tension in the air, a sense that something pivotal was about to happen. Luke Harding had arrived at the station earlier than usual. His boots echoing on the wooden platform, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd until they settled on Clara. Unlike before, when their conversations had been private or discreet, today he intended to remove any ambiguity. Today, the town would see what he had seen all along, that Clara was remarkable, worthy, and chosen. He approached her, his movements deliberate. The chatter of the crowd seemed to fade around her as he reached for her hand. Clara's breath caught. This was bold, audacious, something entirely unlike the cautious gestures that had characterized their prior interactions. Yet she did not pull away. She felt the warmth of his hand against hers, firm but gentle, and the unspoken assurance in his steady gaze. "Everyone here," Luke called out, his voice strong and unwavering, carrying over the crowd. "I want it known that this woman, Clara Whitfield, is my chosen companion. She is remarkable, kind, and strong, and I intend for her to stand beside me as we face life together." The crowd fell silent, some eyes wide with shock, others narrowing in disbelief. Clara's cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from the intensity of the moment. She felt a rush of emotions, pride, joy, and a sense of liberation that she had not realized she craved for years. She had been invisible, ignored, dismissed, and now, in one bold act, Luke had not only acknowledged her but celebrated her in front of everyone for Clara. This was transformative. The years of whispered judgments, polite neglect, and self-doubt seemed to fall away, replaced by the exhilarating affirmation that she mattered. She realized that Luke's declaration was not just about the public spectacle, it was about validating her worth, showing her that she was seen for who she truly was. It was about courage, respect, and the power of recognition. The townsfolk whispered among themselves, some still skeptical, others clearly impressed, but their opinions no longer held the power they once had over Clara. She had felt invisible for too long, and now she had been chosen in a way that could not be ignored. Luke's public gesture was not merely romantic, it was a statement of defiance against the shallow judgments of society, a challenge to the assumptions that had long confined her. As she looked at Luke, hand in hand on the bustling platform, Clara felt a wave of gratitude and deep emotional connection. This cowboy had not only noticed her but had acted boldly, refusing to wait for the town's approval or her own lingering doubts. His actions had created a new reality, one where she was no longer overlooked, no longer defined by age or status, but recognized and valued for the person she had always been in that moment. Standing in the midst of the bustling station, Clara understood that life could change in an instant. One courageous act, one deliberate choice, could redefine her world. She had been invisible, she had been ignored, but now she was chosen, celebrated, and loved. The public declaration marked the turning point in her life, the moment when she stepped into her own significance and embraced the possibility of a future filled with recognition, respect, and love. The sun rose slowly over the frontier town, casting long golden beams across the dusty streets and the train tracks that had once seemed endless to Clara Whitfield. Today, everything felt different. The town, which had long ignored her, now seemed to fade into the background as she stood beside Luke Harding, holding his hand firmly. Feeling the warmth of his presence and the certainty of his choice, the public declaration at the station had changed everything, not just in the eyes of the townsfolk, but within Clara herself. As the morning bustle continued around them, Clara and Luke walked together toward the train that would carry them away from the town that had ignored her for so long. The familiar clamor of travelers and the hissing of the steam engine contrasted sharply with the stillness of her own thoughts. Clara's heart was full, brimming with an excitement she had not felt since her youth. She realized that being chosen had unlocked a part of her she had long kept dormant, a courage to embrace life fully, to accept love openly, and to step forward without fear of judgment. Luke, walking beside her with quiet strength, glanced at her with a mixture of admiration and affection. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice soft yet confident. It was more than a question about the journey ahead. It was an acknowledgement of the leap of faith she had just taken, leaving behind the old life and embracing something new. Clara nodded, squeezing his hand gently. "I am," she replied. "I've waited for someone to see me, and now I don't need anyone else's approval, I only need yours." The words carried more weight than she realized. They were not merely a declaration to Luke, but also a proclamation to herself. She had claimed her own worth, her own significance, and her own right to happiness. The train whistle blew, signaling the beginning of a new chapter. Clara stepped onto the platform with Luke by her side, her head held high, aware of the townsfolk watching. Some eyes were wide with astonishment, others with curiosity, and a few still held judgment. But it no longer mattered. She had been seen and chosen by someone who mattered most. In that recognition lay her freedom. As the train doors closed behind them, Clara felt a sense of liberation washing over her. She glanced at Luke, and for the first time she felt completely unguarded, trusting, and fully alive in his presence. The cowboy had not only chosen her publicly, he had also chosen her heart privately, respecting it, valuing it, and affirming it in a way no one else had ever done. The journey ahead was unknown, full of possibilities and challenges alike, but for the first time, Clara did not fear the uncertainty. Luke's steady hand and unwavering regard gave her the courage to embrace what lay ahead together. They would face the unknown as partners, companions, and equals. The public act of love had not just transformed their standing in the town. It had transformed their hearts, creating a bond built on respect, trust, and mutual admiration. By the time the train began its slow departure, Clara looked out the window at the town receding in the distance. She felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for Luke, but for herself. She had survived years of invisibility and had emerged into recognition, love, and possibility. She realized that life had not passed her by. It had simply been waiting for the right person to see her, the right moment to act boldly, and the right courage within herself to accept the love she deserved. As the train carried them toward a future unbound by judgment or expectation, Clara knew that this was only the beginning. A new life awaited her, full of promise, partnership, and shared dreams. The days of being ignored were behind her, replaced by a life where she was celebrated, cherished, and chosen every day together. They were free to write their story, a story of courage, love, and the triumph of being seen when it mattered most.